been spotted in the Americas for the very first time after making a remarkable journey.
Yeah, the bird of prey has flown an epic 4,000 miles from Scotland to Barbados, probably hitching a lift on boats along the way.
Well, to chat about this in a little more detail now, we are joined by Dr. Tim McCrill from the Roy Dennis Wildlife Foundation. Morning, Tim. How on earth do we think this happened?
Yeah, morning. It's an amazing story. Basically, this young osprey would have left its nest site probably at the end of August, early September last year. And young ospreys have a difficult time as it is because they migrate to their wintering grounds, which are typically West Africa or perhaps Southern Europe, on their own. So they're navigating for the first time and they're traveling alone. And what happens is that they're basically following instinct. So they're going southwest. But for a young bird going south for the first time, if it meets really strong easterly winds, then it can quite easily get blown off course. And because of the UK's position at the edge of Western Europe, basically, if we get easterly winds during autumn, it can be bad news for young ospreys because they can get blown out into the Atlantic. So we've had some birds that we've satellite tagged, which have done amazing journeys direct from Southwest Ireland to northern Spain. Another one that flew all the way to the Cape Verde Islands off the coast of Africa. But what's never happened is we've had one that's actually been blown so far out, it's ended up on the other side of the Atlantic. And as you say, it's a long way. It's about 3,800 miles, even if it flew from the southwest tip of Ireland. So although ospreys could maybe do 1,000 miles or 1,500 miles in one go, doing 3,800 is probably a bit too much. So we think that perhaps it interrupted its journey on the Azores, or maybe, as you say, it hitched a lift on a boat.
How common is it that that might be an option?
Well, it happens more than you might think, because you can imagine that a young bird flying south for the first time, even if they leave their nest site in really good condition because their parents give them lots of fish prior to them departing on migration, once they leave, that's it, they're on their own. And so, if they're making a long flight over the sea, then they're going to be using their energy reserves very quickly, and they will get tired. And if there's a boat or something else floating in the sea, then they're going to take the opportunity to have a rest. And if you look at the shipping lanes that run towards the Caribbean, then it is possible that this bird might have hitched a lift even on a couple of boats. There was one satellite tagged osprey from North America which actually got blown out into the Atlantic on a hurricane, and that hitched a lift on I think 4 or 5 different boats and nearly made it to the Azores. So there is a kind of precedent for this kind of thing, but we've never known one to actually make it across the Atlantic. So it's an incredible story.
You talked about energy reserves as well. I mean, can they eat along the way?
Well, ospreys only eat fish, so you might think, well, if they're at sea, that's fine because there's fish in the sea. But the ospreys, the way they hunt is they dive down into the water and they catch fish with their talons, but then they don't eat in the air. So what they've got to do is they've got to find somewhere to perch and eat the fish. So the chances are, when they're making long flights over the sea, there's no opportunity for them to feed. And we have had some satellite tag birds that have gone 3 or 4 days. One was blown right out into the Atlantic and was flying for 64 hours. So they can make these amazingly long flights. But, for one to actually make it across the Atlantic is something quite remarkable.
And what might happen to this particular bird now?
Well, that's the big question, because, of course, what we don't know is exactly what it's going to do this time next spring. So a young osprey in its first winter is basically going to find a wintering site. And if it settles somewhere, it will remain there for the whole of its second year. So this year, that osprey is basically probably going to enjoy the sun in Barbados for the whole year. What's going to be fascinating is what it does this time next year, because at that point, the urge to go back to where it came from is going to get quite strong. Now, of course, it's probably not going to make the return journey over the Atlantic. So the chances are it might try and migrate up along the east coast of North America. And we know there's a different race of osprey that breeds on the east coast of North America. So it's quite possible that it might end up nesting somewhere, anywhere from right up towards New York, into New Hampshire. So it's going to be fascinating to see what happens. And we're going to be really reliant on bird watchers who hopefully, with a bit of luck, might see this bird and enable us to follow its journey in future months and maybe even years.
It is really fascinating to hear about this. Tim, thank you for being with us this morning. Dr. Tim McCrill there from the Roy Dennis Wildlife Foundation. I mean, frankly, it's got the right idea.
I was just going to say it's chosen the right place, hasn't it?
Where you might go if you want to migrate anywhere, go to Barbados.
That is one
Do
clever
not
bird.
blame it.
Yeah.